Yeah.
No choice. All right. Welcome to UAP Society live stream. Very exciting today. We have Ross Coulthart. He's an amazing Australian investigative journalist. I've been a fan of his for a while now, and he has some amazing documentaries, including one that he just released on the 21st of August with 7 News. So we'll go over that. So first, we have Vinnie Adams here from Disclosure Team. Vinnie with the Calvine photo, man. Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, man. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be a part of UAP Society and know both of you guys really well. I appreciate you and your work as well as your friendship. So, yeah, this is going to be good.
Awesome. 42 holder, man. Thanks for being in the UAP Society. And you're always welcome here, as always. And next up is Carl the Crusher. Carl, another 42 holder, man. So awesome. So excited to get the Sky 360 systems going. I'm super pumped. So
Yeah,
thanks
me
for being
too.
here, man.
We've got a great new location lined up to do it either at Skinwalker Ranch or the predecessor at Mount Wilson Ranch. We've got all lined up. So it's going to be great. I've been researching there a lot. And man, Ross's documentary was awesome, though. I can't wait to talk about that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I was so pumped. Yeah, I heard about it. I knew it was going to be awesome based on his previous work. And I was really, really happy with it. I watched it again, watched it this morning. And so before I introduce him here, I have a trailer I made. You can watch it on the UAP Society YouTube. So we'll go ahead and play that, and then we'll bring Ross on. So let's check this out.
Pilots have I've talked to Navy pilots, have absolutely nothing to gain by telling me information. They showed me photographs of things that were very unusual. And in fact, there's something in our airspace that we do not control, and that ought to be very concerning.
Shortly after our interview, the congressman showed me in confidence the photographs he was talking about. If authentic, they're extraordinary. They are very clear Polaroid images of a hovering, metallic flying saucer.
Looking at all these videotapes, okay, I've come to two conclusions. One conclusion is you have to be very careful. Some of these sightings are optical illusions, so you have to eliminate them very carefully. The other possibility is they are not ours, that they represent a technology that is hundreds, thousands of years more advanced than us. And if they can go between stars, it means they're up to maybe 1 million years more advanced than us.
Do you think the United States knows a lot more than it's letting on?
The question is the United States hiding something? Well, of course.
Next. The United States government is in possession of alien technology.
I know it for a fact. I mean, I just know that.
Why do you know that?
Because I've spoken to the people who are about to come out and whistleblow on it.
Before you leave office, will you let us know if there's aliens?
No. An alien spacecraft did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947.
So there has been a cover-up.
Oh, yes.
All right. Wow, so awesome, man. I love that thing. Great show. Great show. And so let's bring the man on himself. Ross Coulthart, thank you so much, Ross, for being here. I know it's early there in Australia.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you guys. I'm honored to be invited on UAP Society, and it's lovely to see Vinnie. Huge fan of all of you.
Good to see you, Ross.
Yeah, so basically, we have an hour with you. I know you're on a tight schedule. I'm sure you're super busy right now. So again, appreciate all the time taken out of your schedule. Thanks everyone for being here, all our current watchers and basically viewers in the future. The idea, Ross, was just to have a comfortable chat, really, to go over your documentary. Essentially, you talked to some amazing people. So I saw Tim Burchett, he had some great comments in there. Michio Kaku, Gary Nolan. So I had a lot of questions on our Twitter as well about Gary Nolan, about the sphere, basically the shavings, when is it coming back? Also, and then some other kind of viewer questions at the end that we should have time for. So basically, I guess, can you just give how was it going across the U.S.? I live in Portugal now. You live in and are from Australia. How was it traveling across the U.S. with Bryce?
It was great fun. I mean, to be honest with you, Bryce and I, whom you know, we do this podcast together called Need to Know. And we'd always conceived the film that we wanted to make as a road trip. like two middle-aged guys, or probably late middle-aged, to be brutally honest with you, traveling across the United States, seeing the phenomenon through our reasonably well-informed eyes, but trying to explain it to a lay audience. And I guess for that reason, that's one of the reasons why, in the long run, what Bryce and I would like to do is make a film, a director's cut, if you like, of what I shot both last year and this year, and put it together as a kind of a director's cut of a film that would explain to the lay audience why this issue matters. Because I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely comfortable with the slightly sensationalized way that a network like my network in Australia would cut up the film they choose to cut it up. I think there's so much material. I mean, the thing I'm excited about from my travels across the US is there is something about squeezing the flesh with people, about looking them in the eye, breaking bread with them, having a beer with them, getting to know them in a direct way. We're basically monkeys, we still smell pheromones, and we essentially, the way we engage with each other is very tactile, and there's something that you get when you're in person with people that you don't get when you're doing stuff on Zoom, which is the way all of us have had to operate for the past few years because of the pandemic. And for me, that's the privilege. There's always a sort of a devil's burden that you have to do, the devil's contract, where to get the support of a network to actually go off and tell the story and make them a yarn for network television in Australia, there are always compromises that you have to make. And I want to make my own version that basically presents the story in the way that I think it should be told, in more detail and in more length and more slightly complicated exposition for the audience, because I think there's so much there. I think we're in an incredibly exciting time right now. I think the phenomenon is showing itself more often, and I think that's deliberate, I suspect. And I think the pressure and the momentum for the United States government, but also other governments around the world, including the British government in particular, to be more candid about what they know is slowly growing. There's a momentum here that I've not seen before. And that was the biggest takeaway for me from the United States, is that behind the scenes, while I'm talking on camera to people like Tim Burchett, I'm also talking behind the scenes to congressional staffers, congressmen, senators, and congresswomen, by the way, and trying to basically find out what's really going on in those committees. And the thing that I don't think I realized, and I certainly don't think many of the people following this issue quite realize, is how much has been going on in the Congress behind the scenes. And I went to the United States incredibly pessimistic, frankly, that there was going to be any kind of public hearings. I mean, after that polite farce in mid-May that passed for the two intelligence officials, generously sharing with us one blurry image of a little object about a half a mile away from a plane cockpit. And we were meant to feel grateful that they were admitting that they couldn't explain this one incident. But don't worry, they're commercial drones and we'll resolve it all very soon. So don't you worry your tiny little heads about this. I was very depressed that Congress was going to allow itself to be snowed, and that essentially there was going to be a continuation of what many of my interviewees in the story actually said is a cover-up, and has been a cover-up for all of 70 years. And the thing that was my takeaway in the United States was that there is a momentum here that the United States even can't control. So much information out there in the public domain. The phenomenon appears to be manifesting itself so more frequently, both to military and commercial pilots, that the ability to just sit on it and snow media. I think a lot of the mainstream media continues to be snowed, quite frankly, and stays away from the subject matter because they're unnecessarily scared of the ridicule and the stigma that's been attached to it in the past. But I do think there's a change, and that was my biggest takeaway from my visit, that everybody I spoke to, there is a steel in the Congress. They know they've been bullshitted. And the reason they know that is because they've had private hearings that you and I don't know a lot of detail about. Yes, there've been videos shown. People have attended in secure skiffs where they've been briefed on incidents and told and shown videos. There are already quiet hearings happening. And the thing that I had the opportunity to literally go and sit on park benches in different cities and meet some of the sources who helped me with my original book, In Plain Sight. And a number of them have been approached by congressional staffers and asked to give evidence. There's a momentum here. There's a lot that I can't talk about, unfortunately, where it's obvious to me that there is a rollout. There's a plan happening. There is a very deliberate strategy by a very dedicated and committed group of people to get this story out there. And it's going to start with private hearings in the Congress, I think relatively soon, perhaps early next year, perhaps later this year. And I think they will be dramatic. And as Gary Nolan, Professor Gary Nolan of Stanford University told me in the interview that he did with me, he's revealed to me that he's aware of at least 2 whistleblowers who, if they give evidence, it's pretty much game over.
That's one thing I just want to say is I spoke to Gary Nolan, and he mentioned on my interview with him that we were going to start seeing language being brought in about whistleblowers, immunity, whatever you want to call it. And within 2 weeks, what did we see? We saw language. So,
Yep.
you know, what he says, you have to kind of take it, you know. And one other point I just want to make, sorry to jump in, is that you were talking about congressional staffers. And I've heard, and I've spoken to people who are in the know, let's say, that staffers are just as important as the congressmen and the representatives themselves.
They're more important. Like, let's talk, Vinnie, in the context of Calvine. I mean, one of the people who was a congressional staffer way back in 1991 when Calvine was an issue, Senator Robert Byrd was one of the most formidable and powerful senators in the Congress. And the young staffer who he asked to go off and investigate Calvine was Christopher Mellon, who's now the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. And Christopher Mellon knows a lot because of his security clearances. The security clearances that he had as a congressional staffer, I think he was the minority staffer on the House Intelligence Committee. It's phenomenal, the level of compartmentalized top secret clearances that those staffers have to have by law. It's mandated by the Congress that they must see all the darkest secrets. And, oh, by the way, Vinnie, one of the things that Mellon did do as a result of his approach from Senator Robert Byrd, he did ask the US military, is what was seen in that Calvine photograph a secret craft of the United States government? Is it a black project? Is it the Aurora? You know, do we have anything equating to an Aurora? And that was also in the context of the photograph that was not the photograph, the sighting that was made by a chap on an oil rig.
Chris Gibson.
And again, Mellon investigated that. And so this is why I and Bryce, when we do our podcast, we try and remind people of their history because, you know, you've done some fantastic work in the last few weeks with Dr. David Clark, which I'm really excited about. And I think the significance of the Calvine story is only just beginning to emerge.
I agree.
But the significance for me is that one of the reasons Congress is so pissed right now is because they now realize they've been lied to. And that was the big thing for me, is people who were previously a bit shy about engaging with an Aussie investigative journalist, even on background, who were wary because of the constraints that they understandably have. The thing that I found the most heartening takeaway was that they are now steely in their resolve. And they know things that they can't talk to me about, and they're not, you know, by the way, they're not breaching their national security oath by revealing it to me, but what they are showing is a resolve. And the thing that I find heartening is As you probably divined from my book and my commentary since the book was published, I have spoken to people who purport to have knowledge of a secret program inside the US government that is allegedly trying to reverse engineer non-human technology. Now, I've never known quite whether or not to take it seriously, because every journo always thinks, is there a possibility that this could be disinformation? Is this just an attempt by the United States to fire a whiff of grape shot across the Russian and Chinese bows, by suggesting that they've got more up their sleeve than they're publicly admitting? But having now spoken to a number of my sources in person in different American cities and parts of the world, I'm really interested and happy that there is a determined effort going on behind the scenes to get witnesses before the Congress to testify. And the most important thing, as Gary acknowledged to you guys, is the fact that it was vitally important to get legislation in place and ready which would protect these witnesses. And I'm pretty confident that's going to happen. That the House of Reps has already passed one chunk of it, which is the protection of people to make sure that they can come forward without losing their jobs. But there's also a vast suite of other bits of legislation that are going to be coming through from the House of Reps into the Senate, which will go into the 2023 appropriations, which probably won't be passed, I suspect, until, like last year, December. And so it's more likely than not that the really big witnesses won't be sitting down in the Congress until early next year. But boy, am I excited at the prospect of seeing these people testify. If what they've told me, and if what I understand they've told congressional staffers, is put into the public domain, or even privately in a committee hearing, it'll leak. There's no way it won't leak. It's exciting. We're in very, very interesting times.
Definitely. You mentioned, I'll give you a minute, Carl, after this, but while we have Vinnie and Ross here, you guys mentioned Calvine. Just because we had Calvine, what's the update on that? I know you did a 2-hour stream just now, Vinnie, but do you want to give just a quick update on Calvine and see if we can ferret out any information?
When I was in the States, I became aware from multiple sources of what to me stank of a deliberate disinformation blowback against the Calvine story. The Americans are very nervous about the Calvine story. And one of the things that, as a journalist, you have to be sort of wise for is the possibility that in order to protect a project, the Americans will deceive. And I didn't feel that I was being given the straight story when I was being told by multiple people that Calvine was probably a hoax. And there was a deliberate, it was, in many ways, it was very much the fact that it was the same story over and over again. It was like people have been told, this is what you're going to put out, this is what you start telling people. And Vinnie, you and I spoke before we went on air. I'm aware of British intelligence, defense intelligence people who, let me put it this way, have led me to the view that whatever this object was, this craft was, it was a craft controlled by an American pilot, and it came out of RAF Machrihanish.
Yep, that's what I've heard.
And I'm in no doubt whatsoever about that.
Yep, we heard many more points as well.
And the interesting thing is, if you think about the implications of that, it means that, are those witnesses correct? If they're correct that this was a hovering giant object that hovered in place multiple minutes with no visible means of propulsion, no jet exhaust noise, no rocket exhaust noise, what the hell was keeping it hovering in the air like that? And then when it moved off at extraordinary velocity straight up, as the witnesses also apparently say, what kind of propulsion system is capable of doing that? Now that was, what's that, mate, 31 years ago?
32 years ago.
32 years ago.
Yeah.
It would explain why Area 51 really hasn't had anything out of Area 51 for much of the last 30 years. And I think it's also incredibly significant that platform, if it is American technology, which is essentially what we're hinting here, if that platform is American technology, one, it suggests to me that they have some form of positive lift propulsion, possibly anti-gravity, that is not yet known within human science. If it's not that, it's something else. And they've had it for 32 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Where's the
And I'd
data
lie
coming?
about it. And let me say, forgive me, Chris, I apologize.
Go ahead.
I would lie about that. If I was a Pentagon general or an Air Force officer and I knew about that, I would want to protect that program. And
Absolutely.
I think it's absolutely important. The one thing that I can understand America might try and do is to protect that technology, if it is American technology. I mean, if you work through the possible explanations, ironically, in the back of my mind, one of the explanations that I have in the back of my head, Vinnie, is the fiction book. Is it God's Man in War? I can't remember, written by Tom DeLonge.
Yeah.
Where he talks about, in a fictional account, a human pilot flying a non-human craft using neural technology, which is one possible explanation. You know, let's be honest. I mean, it's something that Tom says he was told by the general, whoever the general was. Or alternatively, it's just a piece of non-human technology that happened to be floating above a piece of Scottish land surrounded by fighter jets, and it took off when the fighter jets turned up. That's another possible explanation. Or it's technology that's been developed by the US. Or the whole thing's a hoax, which of course is perhaps what certain officials in Washington want us to think. I'm not so sure anymore. I have to admit, I always thought that when Mellon told me a year ago that he'd investigated the possibility of the Aurora TR-3B story and found that it was completely categorically denied to him, as the most, one of the most senior cleared staffers in the Congress, authorized to know about any special access program, including unacknowledged special access programs and including waived unacknowledged special access programs. He was categorically given an assurance that this was not American technology. So the implications of that are that if it is, somebody's lied. Somebody's committed a criminal contempt on the Congress. Now, just hypothetically, if Congress knew that, don't you think they'd be really pissed right now?
Oh, yeah.
And it might explain the change of mood. It might explain the change of mood. That's the thing that I think is really interesting to me is, whereas before, a year ago when I was in the States and I was talking to congressmen, senators and their staffers who might be willing to even engage on this subject, most of them wouldn't out of sheer embarrassment. Now there's an aggressive desire to get to the truth of the matter and a stated resolve that they know that they've been deceived. And that's the difference. That's what's happened inside the Congress that I've really noticed a difference in. And there's also, I think, a more steely determination in the minds of the people who are pushing for transparency. There's quite clearly, as we all know, a cadre of people, the old TTSA crowd, and even when you engage with them, they're more optimistic, I think, than they were previously. And so overall, I came away with a very optimistic view that there is a resolve in the Congress. They're not going to allow themselves to have the wool pulled over their eyes. And they do feel that they've been deceived, that there has been some kind of a cover-up.
Awesome. Well, Carl, what you haven't spoken, you've been quiet, Carl. What?
Oh yeah, well, I love the documentary. First of all, Ross, and my question is, as an independent filmmaker, a lot of times when I start down a project, I have kind of an idea in mind, but as you make discoveries or you come across new details, it takes on a life of its own. And I felt like this documentary piece, it covered such an amazing spectrum from like the basic background of the whole case of the phenomenon and some of the current events and things going on. And then it gets into very specific details and aspects, even into like Gary Nolan talking about the health effects and like some of the brain scans that have been done and that he's seen, and all of the different spectrums. So I'm just curious, like, as you started down this project, how much of it do you feel like
Navy pilots
you had like in mind going into the project to achieve, and then how much it took on a life of its own and down avenues that you didn't expect as you were making the film? And then is there plans for more from what you discovered?
Believe me, Carl, there is absolutely plans for more, my friend, and thank you for your very kind comments. I mean, look, one of the difficulties of dealing with commercial network television is they often want a product that fits within a commercial hour. And believe me, even though it looks easy, it is a hard process to persuade it's actually Australia's #1 TV network. It's the top commercial TV network in the country. And to persuade them to fund and allocate the time and editing resources and camera resources to allow me to go off to the States for a few weeks and shoot a story like that, it takes a lot of work. And so they have the way that they like to package their product into a commercial 46-minute hour. And I have the way I like to do mine. And, you know, in the end, what we're talking to them about is essentially repackaging the enormous amount of material that we've got, most of which, frankly, hasn't gone to air, and putting that into a longer form, almost cinematic style release, a kind of a director's cut, if you like. And that's what we're really keen to do. In the short term, Bryce and I are working with Seven to do a special edition of the Need to Know podcast that will go out internationally. It'll also go out on the Seven Network's digital channels, which will be probably about an hour to 90 minutes long without ads, giving some of the greater detail from some of the interviews and more of Bryce and I's analysis of what we took from what was being filmed while we were over there. So yes, Carl, you're absolutely on the money, and I can see you're a filmmaker. The bottom line is there are always ways of cutting material, and it did morph as we go. For example, one of the things that, frankly, I probably would be more cautious about in terms of how we present it is the Sphere story. For the simple fact that we just don't know yet whether it is or it isn't non-human technology. Jim passionately believes that it is, and the simple story that we told was, here is a bloke in Texas.
I've had this thing for over 40 years.
Sorry,
it's a part.
I have a little video here I can play while we're chatting about it.
Yeah, sure.
I get a lot of questions about
I've had this thing for over 40 years. It's a part of me now. Sometimes I feel like it's protected me.
You think that's alien technology, don't you?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do.
That's a huge claim.
I believe it has to do it.
I love this ball rolling across. Sorry, guys, I recorded it too fast.
And just to be clear, we're not saying that moment when the ball rolls across screen, that's the ball doing that under its own speed.
Sure.
That was a producer with a sense of humor, I suspect. I didn't even know that was going in the cut, frankly. But the story of Jim's Sphere is fascinating. And look, there's things I can't talk about, which is why I've put the Sphere into the film. You know, there's always reasons why you put things into a film that I want to know first whether there is anything anomalous in the Sphere before we proceed any further with telling that story. As you know, there's a long history in America of the so-called Betz spheres. People occasionally across the continental United States have discovered, and not just in the US, by the way, these weird metallic spheres. And one of them was a family called the Betz family in, I think, about 1974. And they attributed things to that object, that sphere, that they couldn't explain. It was, in fact, witnessed by multiple witnesses. On multiple occasions it was filmed. And indeed, Jim's shown us video that he's filmed of the sphere moving apparently under its own power. But all of that needs to be investigated. And frankly, whilst a lot of people want us to say, yeah, it's alien technology, we're not going to say that, because that's a terrible danger. I mean, obviously, there's always the possibility that it can be plausibly explained with some prosaic piece of technology. But the interesting thing is that I think we need to start engaging seriously with these claims. I mean, to me, one of the things that leapt out to me when I started researching my book was that TTSA, Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, signed a CRADA, essentially a commercial research agreement, with the Department of Defense, the US Army, to research and investigate metamaterials, which not just TTSA's people, sections of the US Army said came from possible alien craft. And in the commercial agreement, one of the things that was missed by a lot of people in the commercial agreement that was signed, which is a public document, is an acknowledgement that some of the so-called metamaterials that were provided as part of this collaborative research agreement, which is still going on, by the way, some of those so-called metamaterials came from the military. And so we know that the US military is collaborating with an independent group of scientists to investigate metamaterials. They're talking about putting terahertz frequencies through what they believe may well be a lump off an alien spacecraft. So in that context, when somebody like Jim Marlin tells me, both on and off the record, a very interesting story that basically suggests that he may very well have stumbled across something 42 years ago that may be anomalous technology, we think it's worthy of investigation. And interestingly enough, so did Professor Gary Nolan. And so that's essentially what we're doing. We're basically making sure that the sphere is under the care and control now of a professor who has access to other scientists and technologies which allow him and them to properly investigate and analyze. It may very well be that it turns out to be a prosaic object. If that's the case, all well and good. But at least it's being properly investigated now under proper control conditions.
Yeah. I don't want to keep hijacking the conversation, but
please.
I'll be brutalized online if I don't ask you about the images that Tim Burchett showed you.
Yeah, look, Tim's, I mean, it's funny, I may not necessarily agree with politically everything Tim says, but he is a good human being. He told me a lovely story, by the way. One of the reasons I think he agreed to speak to me is, and you come across this, I got to know John McCain a bit when I was a younger journalist who was a presidential candidate at the time. And he had an enormous affection for Australian servicemen because of his service in Vietnam. And Tim has an enormous affection for the Australian military because of his father's experiences in the Pacific War. And he was showing me photographs of his dad, I think from Borneo or wherever it was he served. And, you know, there's a huge debt and acknowledgement between our two countries that often gets me in the door in Washington, D.C., speaking to people who I'm gobsmacked are kind enough to engage with me. And Tim, God bless him, he's an amiable, congenial Southerner from Tennessee who passionately believes that there has been a cover-up. And he's one of the few people in the Congress who's prepared to say it. And the interesting thing is, privately, I can tell you, behind the scenes, there are multiple congressional staffers, congressional representatives, and senators who are saying the same thing. It's just that Tim's saying it publicly. And so in the course of our conversation, Tim told me flatly that he felt that there was a cover-up and that the US knew a lot more than it's letting on. He admitted that part of this has come from briefings that he's had both on the Hill and privately with people who've approached him. And one group that has approached him is family friends from Tennessee who've had in their family for quite some considerable time Polaroid photographs of an object that was seen by a member of the family who Tim apparently knew and respected greatly. And they've assured him of the provenance of the photographs. And frankly, you know, they're not national security photographs. I've read speculation on Twitter that Tim was showing me something that might have been leaked from the Pentagon. That's not the case. And it's not a hat-shaped UFO image that's previously been seen on the internet. Some people had suggested that it might be a very famous image that was shot through a truck window on a highway. Not that one at all. This is actually far clearer than that. An astonishing image, quite breathtaking in its clarity. Allegedly a Polaroid. And as you know, one of the things with Polaroid photographs is once the image is recorded on the Polaroid photograph, so long as you have the original Polaroid, which Tim does, you can then get it analysed to see whether there's any evidence of meddling with it. And Tim's in the process of doing the right thing. He's getting it properly photo analysed to rule out the possibility that somebody's given him a hoax image. And he's reasonably sure it's not a hoax image. And frankly, I'm looking forward to the day that image sees the light of day and that family tells its story. I hope I get the chance to tell the story.
Amazing. Wow.
And by the way, one of the things that I really want to emphasize is I've been copping a bit of stick from people online who say all the time, oh, that Coulthart, he's just basically, he won't reveal his sources. He never comes forward with hard evidence. And frankly, what that betrays to me is a fundamental misunderstanding of the obligations I have as a journalist to people who come forward with information. I mean, I know you've got the same constraints, Vinnie, with the Calvine story. I'm aware of the issues that you've got with certain people from defence intelligence who can't speak publicly. And I have the same dilemma. I have people in intelligence services, both in Britain, Australia, America and France, who are helping me, but I can't betray those people. I can't do anything that would allow them to be compromised in any way. I take extraordinary efforts to protect their identity and to ensure that I don't leave a trail for defence security people to track down sources of leaks. And I also go to an enormous amount of trouble to make sure that I'm not saying or doing anything that might compromise a valuable intelligence project or compromise the identity of intelligence officials. I think we have obligations about that. The world is a very, very dangerous place right now. China and Russia would kill for this technology, no doubt. And we are in a little mini private Cold War right now with China and Russia, I am absolutely sure, to get to the bottom of the technological mystery that lies behind UAPs. And it's an undeclared war, but it's a Cold War, and it's nonetheless a very dangerous one. And so I have respect for the people, even those who've presided over the cover-up in the United States. I understand why they've done it. And I guess why I feel there's no need for a bloodletting. There's part of me that likes the idea of publicly vilifying people who've been responsible for deceiving and lying for so many years. But there's also part of me that understands the reason why that's happened. They are patriots. They're people who've done things for what they perceived to be a very laudable reason. The trouble now for them is that they've committed crimes. They've lied to Congress. A contempt of the Congress is a really serious criminal offence. And one of the dilemmas that the Congress has is resolving how to tell that story. And of course the British government has lied. Frankly, I don't know whether the Australian government has. I don't know whether they know their arse end from their head when it comes to UFOs. I think they're so worried about doing something that might upset the Americans, they're just not saying anything. But the interesting thing is that people need to understand that all of us, when we're investigating this phenomenon, we have sources who trust us, and I will go to my grave protecting those sources.
Yeah.
Ross, go ahead, Vinnie.
Go on. All I was going to say is that, and I mean this in the nicest and most respectful way to these people that can complain online, is I'd love them to spend a day in our shoes if they had their sources, they would understand. And I know they would. And I mean that in the nicest way. They would not burn people like they expect us to.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. And look, I also understand completely that there is an impatience amongst people, especially experiencers, that they're not being taken seriously, and they're rightfully upset. And that's why I find what Gary Nolan is saying quite refreshing. Gary's saying it's time. I'm not prepared as a scientist to accept that I shouldn't talk about this because I might be professionally vilified when I know it's real. And he does. He knows it's real. I mean, one of the things that you'll be seeing in my special edition of Need to Know is Gary talking about in detail his own personal experiences with the phenomenon. And it's more than just being a paperboy when he was 10 years old. It's even before that, as a child. It's encounters with entities.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about, Ross, is how many of these people, like you're talking to Gary and, Lou Elizondo and a lot of these people that come from To the Stars Academy, they have connections back to like the Stanford Research Institute days, and Gary's from Stanford. And a lot of these guys have involvement with Skinwalker Ranch as well, and the phenomenon apparently running amok down on the ground and affecting people and their health. And so I'm just curious how much of that came up. Did Skinwalker Ranch come up, or how much of the phenomenon occurring and affecting people on the ground or in their homes and personal lives or in their consciousness, and how much that came up?
Well, I guess I can explain that in this way, Carl. As you saw in the story, there's a fellow called Damien Knott, who's an Australian UFO researcher and an incredible, talented guy who I've actually seen personally. Seems to have this ability to attract the phenomenon in a way that I just can't explain. He's one of these people who seems to be a lightning rod for the phenomenon manifesting itself to him. And he suffered terrible injuries, and he's not well. I fear for his mortality, to be honest with you. He's very, very ill as a result of exposure to an object that illuminated or fluoresced right in front of him. And I know, because I've been privy to it for several years, he was approached by Dr. Akila Wirasaka. I hope I've said that name properly, and I apologize, Doctor, if I've got it incorrectly. But he's part of a Harvard University study that is doing a collaborative investigation with Professor Nolan at Stanford into people who've been exposed to UAPs. And secretly, I discovered all around the world, there are people who've been exposed to UAPs, including people at Skinwalker Ranch, who are now part of a study. And sadly, there are people who have died. Damien said on my documentary that he's aware that there are people who have died, and there are. And I think Damien wouldn't mind me saying he's quite worried that he might die from what has happened to him. This is serious. There is a phenomenon here that is very, very real. Nobody's saying for sure that it's alien or ET or little green men from Zeta Reticuli. But there is a phenomenon that perhaps inadvertently, when humans engage with it, it's hurting people. And that's serious. And there is a concern at very high levels in intelligence services and defense departments around the world, notably in the US, that they have a duty of care to their employees. And it kind of came out accidentally in many ways as a result of investigations into the Havana syndrome phenomenon, where US diplomats were being exposed to what appeared to be anomalous radiation. But they discovered that there was a cohort of people that, when they did the analysis, I think it was Kit Green, formerly from the CIA's Weird Desk, who picked this up. There's this phenomenon that is not explainable at the moment, that they're still investigating, that is genuinely concerning good people, military pilots, intelligence officials, people like Damien who are civilian witnesses. They're being exposed in ways that are actually quite dangerous. And I think I've lost track of the question that you asked me, Carl, but essentially if I've encompassed it in that answer, I hope I have. There is a very real response that's happening behind the scenes to the phenomenon.
Yeah, I feel like that's part of the struggle of disclosures, that you have a lot of these programs that were approaching the phenomenon, whether real or not. And a lot of people, like a friend of mine, Chris Bartell, he worked at security at Skinwalker Ranch may have, had MRIs done on him and had no idea why during the time. And so it's very interesting, the layers of that, and how many people may have been affected and not even known during part of these programs.
And this is the thing for me as a journalist that fascinated me, because I freely admit, when I first started digging into this area aggressively, probably back in 2016, 2017, when I first started conceiving the idea of a book, I freely admit I started out as an ambitious debunker. My idea was to get to the bottom of the dark black program inside the US government that's been responsible for this technology all these years. And I suspect that there is some black technology that can explain at least part or some of this phenomenon, perhaps even the Tic Tac. But the thing that I'm not satisfied is we cannot explain the whole phenomenon. And this was the beginning for me of the cognitive dissonance, because at the very beginning of my research, I requested and obtained the kind of standard briefings that national security journalists can get on the QT from different people. What's the story behind this UFO thing? And the stock standard answer is, look, Ross, it's no threat to national security. It really isn't a flight safety risk, and more importantly, it can mostly be prosaically explained. Yes, there's probably some atmospheric phenomena there that'll probably explain it. And I strongly suggest you read the Condign report, which is the British investigation, and if you read that, you'll see that, frankly, they came up with the explanation that it's probably some kind of plasma phenomenon that still hasn't been described in nature. And so I was sort of forewarned and forearmed with that apparently plausible explanation. And then I started doing what investigative journalists are meant to do, which is, okay, ignore the accepted reality. Let's go and look at the evidence. Let's go and talk to the people who purport to know. And then I started hearing a vastly different story. And what was very interesting was that a lot of those people were talking about the fact that they were being engaged with by US government agencies. When I was talking to people about metamaterials, yes, I do happen to think that some of the metamaterials, notably a magnesium bismuth sample that's been much trumpeted by TTSA, I personally think that's nonsense and that it's probably a piece of industrial slag. But in the course of speaking to people about metamaterials, I became aware that contemporaneously, just off to my right shoulder, there were people from the US government who were engaging with some of the people that I was engaging with. And frankly, if it's all BS, why were they there? And then it kept on happening. The CRADA, for example, I talked about that earlier. Why did the US Army sign a CRADA with TTSA and provide some of their own alleged metamaterials if this is all nonsense? And again, I keep on coming back to this. I've raised this with Vinnie and discussed it with him in the past. To me, the absolute smoking gun where people need to sit up and take notice, and for any layperson watching this who isn't familiar with the phenomenon and not across recent UAP history, just go and read, either in my book or in any of the analyses that have been done, the explanation of the significance of the leaked WikiLeaks emails that detailed John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's senior advisors, exchanges with people like General Neil McCasland, General Michael Carey, Lockheed Martin's Robert Weiss, and explain to me, why was a senior staffer to Hillary Clinton having a conversation with two very senior, very interesting US Air Force generals about disclosure with Hillary Clinton? And why has the US national media not engaged with Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton on that matter and discussed with them what they really think now about what they were told in Bill's time as president? The reason why we put Bill's comment to the young boy in Ireland into the story is because I personally think Bill was misled about Roswell. I don't think Mr. Clinton was in any way in any position on the evidence to be able to definitively state that Roswell was not the crash of some kind of craft. And I think the difficulty that he had is that he's only ever as good as a president as the people who've advised him. was there, and this is the central issue here, was there an intention to deceive a president of the United States? If Roswell is real, if it was some kind of crashed craft, and multiple people have said that it was, and frankly, I don't think the US Air Force explanation stands scrutiny. Were there other crash recoveries? And I think there were. Mm-hmm. I've been told by people that they were. I was briefed by Nat Kovitz, a former chief geek for the US Navy, former director of science technology development for the US Navy, that there was a crash retrieval program that he was briefed into. I've spoken to other people who've told me that there was a crash retrieval program. I've spoken to other people who've told me categorically that they believe Roswell was the real crash of a non-human craft. Now, I'm not saying that it was, because I don't know for sure. But was the key issue for me, and I think this is the key issue for Congress, was a president deceived? And that's where we're getting into territory that I think the Congress will now start investigating. That's why this is exciting.
I had one question as well related to that about Trump, the Trump files. I know nothing about it, actually. But what is your take on, do you think one of the UFO files could have been in his recovered file?
No, I actually don't think that, to be honest. I think even Trump wouldn't be insane enough to steal such an incredibly compartmentalized file. I do think, though, and Trump's admissions in his interview with his son, Don Trump Jr., shortly before the election where he won the presidency. Shortly before the election where he lost the presidency. I do think that Trump was briefed something about Roswell and other incidents. It's quite clear he was. And so was Obama. I mean, one of the most interesting things is when Donald Trump says of Roswell, that's very interesting, and I'd like to talk about it more, and maybe at some stage in the future I will. And believe me, I've tried to get him to talk about it. He clearly knows something, and he's clearly been briefed, but I don't know what they tell the presidents to shut them up about this, but Obama's the same. I mean, Obama very conspicuously went to great lengths, and I think went further than almost any other former senior official of the US government in giving credibility to the idea that these Navy sightings need to be taken seriously. And don't forget, Obama and all the other surviving presidents are still given briefings. It's one of the things they're entitled to receive. So whatever Joe Biden is cleared in to know, presumably both Obama and Trump are cleared in to know. And that's one of the aspects of the way the American presidency works that's very interesting. They still receive classified briefings. And that's why they have Secret Service protection.
Yeah. If I could just get one last question in before we finish, Ross, and it's a bit more of a light-hearted one. I'd like to know how it felt for you to be in that small boat in the Catalina Channel off of San Diego, because if it was me, I'd be looking for USOs coming out everywhere. So how did that
was
feel?
Praying. I mean, Ben Hanson's a good mate. The Discovery Channel UFO researcher, Ben Hanson, is a very good friend of Bryce. And I can honestly say we went out there half hoping that something might hover above us and demonstrate itself, but nothing did. But it's quite cool being way out at sea with night vision gear, the likes of which I've never worked with before. I've been in war zones with American soldiers who've let me look through their military-grade night vision intensifiers, and I've always thought to myself, this is why I'm stumbling and they're able to keep on walking in the dark, because it's quite astonishing technology. But it is eerie, and I hope people picked up in the film on what Ben was telling us, that one of the things that's really quite unique about Catalina, Ireland, is that there is a magnetic anomaly there that is absolutely extraordinary. And it might explain why, if there is something down there, it's a convenient place to hide. I mean, imagine if you're using electromagnetic technology to propel your craft. Where's the best place to hide? In a place where there is already an appreciable magnetic anomaly. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I was fascinated to hear what Ben told us on and off the record. He's got some extraordinary vision that he's shot over the years with his cameras, and including vision of objects that quite clearly are in orbit, changing course at phenomenal speeds. And this is fascinating to me that we now have civilians who have access to technology that frankly is as good as, if not better than, the technology that's being used by some of the military and intelligence services. And that's where it's exciting. That's why I'm excited about UAPX and the Galileo project and others who are getting the funding and the resources to put together investigative equipment and technologies that would allow the independent public to detect things. And believe me, my understanding of the frequencies that allow detection of the phenomenon and the aspects of the anomaly that allow it to be followed and detected, my understanding is that it's not that hard and that the technology is there for any layperson to develop. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave you very soon. I apologize, but I've got another commitment in a few minutes.
No, excellent. Thank you, Ross. And that's the goal. All these people here in UAP Society, that's our goal, is to basically a grassroots Galileo project. So right now we're supporting Richard Hoff's Sky 360, as you know. So Carl,
it's a laudable initiative. It's fantastic. Hey, it's really lovely to talk to you guys. It's an honor and a privilege to be invited onto UAP Society. It's great to see you, Vinnie. Keep up the hard work on Calvine. Don't let the bullshit grind you down. All the best.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross. Have a great day. Thank you, man.
See you guys. All the best.
All right, take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Ross.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Man, that was so awesome.
I apologize. I felt like I hijacked
an hour. Yeah.
It goes so quick, man.
Yeah, it was fast. I mean, he covered everything like in the first 30 minutes. Tim Burchett, he mentioned all those other staffers, right? I didn't think about the staffers. He said were equally important.
Yeah, well, I had an interview. I interviewed Katie Howland, who's quite prominent now on Twitter, and she's she's worked closely in the kind of in that realm, let's say. And I raised it with her, like how important are the staffers to the senators and the congressmen and the representatives. And she said, as well as what Ross just said, that they are as important, if not more important, because they're the first port of call with this information, and then maybe they decide how much of it then goes through to the people that they're working under. So they get it all. They get it all. They get to see this stuff. So it is vital that they are taken into account just as much as these high profile figures, So yeah, fascinating stuff. And I don't know enough about American government and its inner workings, but I know enough now, learning through the UAP subject, how it kind of is put together. It's crazy.
I think you guys know more than me. I'm sure Ross does. Like he's traveled all through, talked to everybody. Yeah, that was quite interesting. I thought also another thought I had was he mentioned about Calvine. It seemed like there was a specific wall, and I've heard that before from other, I guess, investigators. Is when you're trying to like identify a disinformation campaign, what happen is there'll be nothing really on the subject, and all of a sudden there's a ton of stuff on that subject, and it all says like the same stuff. All right, here we go.
Yeah, definitely. We know that 2 years after the incident, there were meetings in the Pentagon with defense intelligence from UK going over to discuss. The 3-star generals are very angry that these photographs were being passed around. And this is no rock in the pool. This is no kite in front of the camera kind of thing, Like Ross said, and we kind of briefly touched upon, we have sources inside defense intelligence from the UK that we've spoken to separately, I may add, that have contacted me and some of our team who have corroborated stories. And do we believe it wholeheartedly? No, because you can't. But we've had corroboration from people outside government as well. But we're still piecing the puzzle together, and it's going to be a long process. It's already been over a year. We've released the photo. Let's do another year if it takes that long. But we have to do the investigation properly.
It's so cool, man. You could see he was kind of jealous, that he's an investigative journalist, but you released like this like amazing photo. I mean, It's awesome, man. You're like an investigative journalist. You can say that.
It's a team. It's a team effort. It is a team effort. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without the great work and leadership, I will say, of Dr. Clark. He is phenomenal at what he does.
And it was interesting too. Ross was saying the Calvine, it seemed like he initially maybe thought it could be a hoax, but then he kind of changed his mind. I've been seeing on Twitter, you see the kind of, I would say, compelling videos, where they can point at a little pond or a pool or something, and then make it look like.
Yeah, and I hats off to all the people that have tried to debunk it. I don't see that as a bad thing. Everyone is actively trying to get to the bottom of it. But based on what we know, what we've been told, what we may not have already have released yet, because we can't burn sources, like Ross was saying, that's fine. And that's why I've been pretty quiet about it, about my opinion on it on Twitter and places like that, because I don't want to get to a point where people say, well, why are you saying that? And I'm like, well, I can't tell you. I don't want to be that guy. I may be being that guy a little bit now, but that's Ross's influence. Shout, love you, Ross.
Is there only going to be that one photo, or is there going to be any more?
Man, I'd love the other five. Oh, I'm getting some feedback now.
Carl. It was Carl. He tried to get in.
I'd love to see the other 5 photographs. I'd love to see the negatives. Maybe we'll get there in the end. Who knows? There he is.
Yeah, sorry. I'm having Wi-Fi issues today, guys. Sorry.
Hey, bro.
Just do another 10 minutes. I know it's late and such, but it's good to have you guys here, man. It's awesome. What do you guys think about UAP Society? I know you've been busy. You've been running around, Vinny. Do you want an update or?
I want to hear things now. I feel like I've done enough talking. I miss hearing from Carl. I miss hearing from you, Chris.
What have you been up to, Carl? I know I've been roping you in, and you're excited about the UAP Society 360 deployment. But otherwise, what have you been working on? Phenomenon coming up?
Yeah, we got Phenomenon coming up. So I'm going to be revisiting up and hanging out with the Skinwalker Ranch crew, and then there's hundreds of acres between Skinwalker Ranch and 9 Mile Canyon that the landowners are having me and a few other people go and investigate for the first time. It's never been explored. And then the predecessor to Skinwalker Ranch is called Mount Wilson Ranch, and it's actually several hundred acres in Nevada. And I got contacted by the property owner that bought it from Bigelow to come up there and met with them. And that place is wild. I mean, they were doing Jacques Vallée and all those guys. They were up there with Hal Puthoff and half of the people from Stanford too. And they were doing the close encounters from the third kind stuff up in the canyons with the light and sound frequency experiments. They found a Masonic Templar sword. We found 4 abandoned mine shafts back on the land, Native American artifacts. There were tons of stuff. I mean, ghost stories and paranormal stuff, all of it.
So I've been videos.
Yeah, I've been going up there, and I've got mountains and mountains of footage just from 48 hours up there I'm trying to go through. So tons of stuff going on. Yeah.
And then Phenomenon, I guess, is next month.
Yeah, Phenomenon. That's when I'm going to be doing Phenomenon, doing all that, and then researching the land up there around that as well. There's supposed to be petroglyphs up there. My cousin's going to take me to. We were going to go there, Chris, when we were up there for the UFO Disclosure Symposium, but there's a petroglyph of a woolly mammoth and a guy throwing a spear at a woolly mammoth that I guess is. I'm going to go check that out too, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, awesome. And let's see what's up for you next, Vinny. Calvine, recover.
Well, I mean, the Calvine, it's massively continuing. We have and I say it like a hydra-headed leads, but we're going down, and we're doing this all day, every day, as well as doing all my other stuff, with my YouTube and stuff. Our investigation is a daily thing. And then I'm also, obviously, I'm working for UAP Media UK, so we're always trying to look for stories there. We're speaking to people behind the scenes. And then I've got the Phenomenology has just finished airing the series in Colombia. We've got plans to go out there again in early 2023. So everything is just full force right now. And I can't be more excited about it all. I like to have my finger in many pies, and that's happening right now.
Yeah, it was that's why I was just so happy to get Ross on. So shout out to Lex Luthor, Danny Overton.
yeah.
He basically set it up. Yeah.
Oh,
So UAP
Lex.
Society, yeah, this is the first YouTube set up by him. And so, yeah, I've heard Diana Pasoka is another one. Maybe people want to get on. Nick Pope, I think he may be coming on. So, yeah, excellent. You guys are always welcome. Always welcome to come on. Any last minute stuff you want to mention?
I just want to say thank you to you, Chris, for allowing me to be a part of UAP Society. You're a good friend. I appreciate all the work you're doing. You're an inspiration. The same goes for Carl, a very, very good friend, somebody who I just enjoy talking to, whether it's by messages on my phone or speaking to in person. You're both awesome, and I'm so glad that I got to meet you guys. So thank you.
I love it, man. I mean, this is one of the huge benefits of doing this job and being a YouTuber is the opportunity. And I thank everybody for being here to give us the opportunity. And yeah, so hopefully we do you guys proud. So have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, you guys. That was awesome.
See you guys. Thanks for being here.